Hello, and welcome to Resolve, an afterplay show. This is an after show for a role-playing game that does not have an actual play, but we tell you all the details of our game, so you'll have to listen to it. Hi, I'm Sammie. I'll be your host. My pronouns are she, her, and I play Asiri Amoli, the Hope of the Abyss. Joining me today is my wonderful co-host, Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I play Boogle, Avatar of Alexander Smog. Both of us use he, him pronouns.
We are also joined today by Daniel.
Hi, my name is Daniel. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the game master for this campaign.
Alright, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Now that we're all here, Alex, why don't you tell us about the actual play?
Previously, in EFFETE, Smog and Tao head to a skyport to speak with a travel agent about visiting another charter. They meet Coast, who gives them pamphlets about several different charters and tourist locations. Smog is most taken with the nightlife and fashion hub, Union Charter. Coast questions why news outlets have not interviewed WorldCorps. Smog asks the rest of the party and Powder via text about the trip. Powder relays the plans to Asiri and explains the concept of a vacation tour. Due to the war and recent revival of tourism, Powder has not been able to take a vacation before. To accommodate their unique needs, WorldCorps books a trip on a zeppelin. This also allows them some tour opportunities, narration around major landmarks, and the zeppelin itself. Asiri realizes how broken the world is while viewing more of it and speaks to Tao about how and if she could help. Pony and Smog design new outfits and armor together. Asiri speaks to Powder about Earth, their early lives, and family before Powder heads to sleep. Smog and Tao enter an airplane in the world of the lost and speak with the stewardess. After finding the Master, Smog asks them to gather some water and Union Charter for a game. The Master, Smog, and Alexander snoop on the passenger's luggage and get hints of memories associated with it.
Now that you've heard the actual play, let's do a deep dive into the session. We're going on a road trip. Although I guess there's no road.
On a sky trip.
A sky trip.
A cloud trip.
Cloud trip.
Vacation, as it were.
It sounds like drugs.
I was about to say, or the Cloud District in Skyrim, but...
Oh my god.
Out of here, Nazim.
We've just finished regrouping after finishing the World of Song, and everyone starts to head their separate ways, but Smog and Tao go immediately to a travel agency.
Yeah, I mean, I've been planning on doing this for a while, and we had a couple minutes where we were like, how do we actually put this together? And my thought was, it makes the most sense as a scene to, like, talk to a person, so physically going to a location seemed the best route.
How long were you thinking of taking a trip to a different charter on Hub World?
I think I mentioned it in passing, maybe before the World of Song, but we've done so much in Sequence Charter now that I think like somewhere in the middle there is like, we should probably make this the next thing we do.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I mentioned it on the podcast before at some point. I don't think it's a big surprise to listeners.
Yeah, there has definitely been that sense of wanting to explore other regions of the planet that you all found yourselves on. So this was definitely going to happen at some point.
Oh, there's just so much to look at and explore in Chrysalis that it's... I've told Dan this before, but I could play the whole game there. I know that kind of defeats the point of interstitial, but it's just so intriguing.
There could have been a different way to do this that was more like pockets of different worlds ended up on the hub or something like that.
Yeah, I guess I never intended the hub world to be as interesting as it turned out. I mainly thought it up as a place that you would visit briefly before you'd go into a different world.
I made it really easy for everybody not to get too excited. It was a room that you couldn't get the fuck out of that had stuff that took you places. You could investigate those things, learn more about where you were going, and that was a fun time, but no, there's nothing interesting about the space itself. To remind people, in my earlier interstitial games, all of the groups were basically in an arcade. It was just a nice box that they could not get out of, and they had information about the quote-unquote games they were getting into.
For this campaign, I wanted to introduce that aspect that you're interacting and working with a larger group of people. The hub world is part of a bigger picture in itself. It definitely does leave the room open for asking more questions about what this hub world is like and exploring it. I really wanted to play around with that element of the fact that you're coming back to what's essentially a kind of home. The entrapment for that necessitates the world travel is through some exterior barrier, not within the world itself.
So I know you've mentioned offhand, Daniel, that there are other cities on this planet. Some of the most extreme ones on the sun side and the dark side are like mostly research stations rather than habitable cities. But do you have an idea of how many cities and towns are on the planet?
Less than there were. I guess I would not be shocked if there were roughly 6 billion humans spread out amongst not just the charters, but the different planets in this star system. Certainly not all of the humans were brought from Earth, and there has been events that have happened in between. As for the number of different charters, I've not put a solid cap on them. Maybe you could think of them as colony cities. Some of them can tend to be spaced out quite a bit, but others are obviously quite larger.
Something that was interesting to me, but I don't think Smog would care about all that much, is when we were looking through the pamphlets, there seemed to be an implication that there were some tourist sites that weren't necessarily closely linked to a charter. They've had enough time to establish something of that caliber. I don't know if it would be like a national park or like, here's where a big weapon struck or something, or here's a meteor impact, but they have things that are not just tied to a city.
I don't know how much of this I mentioned when Tao and Athenos were doing some digging in the library a while back, but there was a pretty large period of time where humanity primarily lived underground. Within some of these islands and these different stony structures, there are networks and remnants of where humans thousands of years ago lived underneath the surface. They're kept track of, especially recently, because that is where a lot of the human population took refuge when the moon was brought down upon the planet. That was like a place that was able to protect them. So those are one of the examples of some of the types of landmarks and special locations outside of a built-up location that people can visit.
Now, other than pure exploration, does Smog have a goal in mind for this trip? Is there some overarching scheme or idea that they are striving to attain here?
Half of it is that he wants the whole party to realize Sequence Charter isn't just it, because there are points where a couple of the other party members have been asking, like, hey, are there any other places out there? And we've only had the smallest hints. There's other stuff going on outside of this charter. Wants them to realize the scope of the job they're working on. And then the other half is he loves fashion, and he wants to get a designer to help him with what he's working on and commission something so that he has better attire for a formal event than the welcome party that they had at the start of the game.
How is Smog feeling about these humans right now?
It's really complicated because a lot of it is colored by his experiences outside of this time that he's not fully connected with because he can't remember them. But it's much less upset and frustrated than he was just as himself before leaving. I think he understands their plight a lot better coming back here. There's a lot more sympathy at the very least.
Daniel, why Union Charter? Is there a theme with the names? I know there's a theme of the name for the ships, but is there a theme for the city names as well?
Everything that was touched by the governance initially has names that are grounded in mathematical theory. Sequence Charter is referring to things like a sequence of numbers. Union is referring to set theory, a union between the collection of two sets, combining them together.
I'm sure we'll explore this in the game at some point, but I wonder if there's any resistance to those names now, especially now that people choose their own names, or is there an initiative to rename the charters?
People's names have taken priority, and even machines that have an artificial personality have also been given names that are outside of what the governance probably would have called them. That's why Thompson has their name and why Hound is called Hound. As for the places, it gets a little bit more complicated because having those names, which is entirely based upon what humans would be able to understand, they grew attachment to those because they're actually more unique. The same name isn't shared between these different places or ships.
Mm-hmm.
So it tampers that motivation to strike out onto a new name. Has it been considered? I think probably. But there's also a lot of navigational systems that would need to be corrected too.
Yeah.
With that process. And also, humanity has not had a huge amount of time since the governance disappeared. They are right now in the process of trying to keep things stable. And it was around that point where the first instances of world travel occurred.
Tell us a bit more about Union Charter. We know it's on the night side of the planet, and it's like a fashion and nightlife empire. Is there anything else unique about the city?
As like a reminder, the planet is Chrysalis, and it is tidally locked to a dwarf star, meaning that there is a permanent sun side and a permanent nighttime side. A lot of the locations are what we would consider to be on the dawn-dusk region, where you still get some sunlight, but it's not completely washing everything. It's also enough to externally warm things up a bit. Union Charter is kind of special in that regard because there's not too many locations that are especially on the nighttime side. It's very hard to grow things like in pure darkness, but there are also some benefits. There is a lot of opportunities for astronomical research, observatories, and monitoring stations that you couldn't otherwise have in a location that's permanently basked in sunlight, starlight, I suppose. There's also a sizable, not just fashion, but business scene. Think about New York City as a city that never sleeps. That location could be basked in eternal darkness, and they probably wouldn't know much of a difference. Union Charter is where a lot of commerce and adjacent communication has gone through.
I am very interested in Coast asking us here about being interviewed, about why that hasn't happened, especially because the party hasn't heard any requests. No one has made a point to get in contact with them if there are any requests.
Yeah, at the time, my main reason for saying that was, I just realized that no one has reached out to interview anybody, even though you have made the news already a few times. My internal rationale as far as why that has not happened is word to other charters maybe isn't traveling as fast as news about when the next meteor shower is going to be, for example. But the party has been fairly active. I think the only opportunity that I could have reasonably made was when you all took a more extended amount of time to reside in Sequence Charter after completing the World of Ages. But I didn't think about it. And it wasn't also one of the things that any of the players mentioned being interested in.
Yeah.
There's obviously an opportunity to do that, maybe soonish.
I also don't think it's a stretch to say maybe Tara was like, hey, don't bother them, they're working. You can wait a little bit, let's get this situated before we harass them with all this questioning.
Well, not just that, but out of this group, who the fuck is camera ready? Like
Smog.
Pony.
Who's up for PR? I would say maybe Tao.
For PR, absolutely.
That's a good point.
That's going to be a chaotic interview if we're all on like a fucking panel.
How many other opportunities besides like maybe at the karaoke bar have you all had one-on-one conversations with other civilians?
Not a ton.
Not happened a whole lot. A lot of people have seen you all after Tara returned from their voyage, because that was a huge chunk of the town assembled for that.
I just imagine the camera moving around trying to get Pony jumping everywhere while she's speaking.
Not sitting still, not looking at the camera.
No,
No.
impossible.
Also, like the size scale we're dealing with, it'd be hard to get everybody in frame all at once.
You all cannot be in the same frame.
They forced us to do a Zoom interview.
No.
Zoom interview. Oh no.
I really appreciate how strategical Smog was in getting all this together for everyone. Because it's like a legitimate challenge sometimes to message all of us.
Yeah, we've established now that Pony has some equipment that'll read stuff out to her. She understands the concept of vacations. Then Smog is like, Asiri is not really used to work in the contemporary sense, and I have no way of communicating this complex thought to her. Let's invite Powder along, and Powder can tell her what's going on.
Which is probably the smartest play you could have made there, because otherwise I don't think Asiri would have won. A rivalry with Smog. I think there's initially like a little bit of Smog's planning something. I don't immediately trust that offhand. But also, there's no purpose for her in this place as described. Sure, it's dark, but she can turn off the lights anywhere. She has no use for fashion. Clothes are not a thing that she gets or understands. She doesn't really understand what the human nightlife sense is. That doesn't... Probably not the first one to go grab a ticket for this ride.
We'll go see some cabaret for you, Asiri.
Okay, now it's my turn to ask you to elaborate on that.
Like, I mean, me, Sammie, would love to go to a cabaret show, but like...
Of the things that might be on offer there, entertainment is what's going to make sense to Asiri.
Music.
Yeah, music, certainly, but I don't...
Food.
In a cozy, dark place.
That is true. Because you did mention that Asiri's finally energized because it's cold and dark, which are like Asiri's favorite things.
That will be a benefit to her, because her metabolism has been running haywire because she is cold-blooded. It is hot for her, comparatively. It'll probably be back to normal for her body-wise. She doesn't really eat cooked food, so I don't know if like a culinary scene would really appeal to her. There's just like a large barrier for her to get interested in there.
We can find some sushi.
She would love that.
Get you a poke bowl.
Just wear that conveyor belt.
Pokeball, hold the rice, please. Thank you.
Hold everything but the fish.
Yeah. Give me some sashimi. That would be best.
Wouldn't you eat the seaweed?
No, the seaweed doesn't grow where she lives. But yeah, smart move to get Powder to explain all this to her, because otherwise I don't think she would have made a move for this.
Yeah, you mentioned that Powder's enthusiasm for it made Asiri go like, well, okay, if Powder could be so excited about it, it can't be that bad.
Yeah, it seems pretty important, so that's pretty much what she's taking her cue from it.
I love that she asks Asiri to pack, and then it's like, oh wait, you don't have anything.
Like, was she gonna bring the rock in her tank? She does have colorful fairy lights that they put around to make her feel better, but other than that, there's really not much.
They kept working on it. Asiri's not swimming in like a concrete box. They're trying to make a habitat.
She appreciates the effort.
It's not easy to do for a creature whose environment you're completely unaware of.
We did take a while trying to figure out what sort of aircraft we would be in for this. And I think you landed on something good after I was like, what can you do that's like a passenger car and a train? Because then you have a room that you can sleep in. And I think that led you to a Zeppelin, which was A+. Wonderful.
This one goes out to my brother, who absolutely loves airships. There's a book that I read a long time ago that I remember being pretty decent. It's called Airborne, and it took place on a Zeppelin. That's actually where I got the description for what it feels like to lift off on one, because I've never been on one myself. There is a pretty apt description for those things as airships, because the inside of them is always pretty. There's usually like a lot of wood, and it's like stained wood, and often the steering is a legit ship's wheel. There's typically this focus on things like luxury and accommodations in them. Things like having a lounge that maybe has like another floor above it is actually probably not completely unheard of. it'd be kind of like a train, but for a flight. It made so much sense to me that it's probably even more comfortable than a long-term travel on a train because it's so gentle, but everything's so elegant.
A bit more akin to like a cruise ship.
Exactly. During the trip, I mocked up in my notebook a rough map of it so I could sort of keep everything organized in my head. And it feels fairly logical. The only thing that I don't know how much we're going to see of is the inner workings of it, like where the crew usually goes. But I guess it depends on what guys are up to.
I guess now is a good time to mention Dee wasn't available for us this week. So Geyser is last seen boarding the vessel with like the largest amount of rainbow luggage you've ever seen, but we will catch up with them later.
That's where we're going to put all of the ridiculous outfits Smog will have commissioned for us.
Yeah, because I do think it's hilarious, and I will have to ask Dee about this later. But if all of that luggage is just empty, they just know that luggage is supposed to go on a trip, so that's why she brings it with her.
We were talking about maybe that's how she's going to bring back samples.
Yeah, that too.
So yeah, in this fancy schmancy Zeppelin, Smog starts sketching. Siri takes a look out the window. Pony has a guided tour. Tao gets a latte at a cafe. There are other people around as well. We are not hogging the entire Zeppelin.
I felt it would be a little boring if it was just you all. And also that kind of feels somewhat unrealistic too. It's not like a private thing that you chartered out.
We're already in a luxury setting. To make it also only us traveling would feel like the antithesis of what Smog was trying to do with the trip.
Yeah, and I wanted to be intentional with the kind of people who went with you on this, because you haven't talked to any of them, but it very much has to do with the kind of place that Union Charter is.
I'm shocked nobody's come up to us, just randomly out of curiosity. Now that you're saying it's New York, I don't know if there's any children with us on this flight, but I would absolutely expect a child to like run up and talk to one of us.
Sammie does make a very good point, especially with characters like Isiri and Smog and Pony. Kids would probably run up to say hi while traveling like that. Who knows? There might be more kids on the flight back.
I like the idea that children are a little more in tune with the otherworldly, the weird, so they can still see a series bubbling abyss stuff.
That probably wouldn't be great for them.
Yeah, exactly.
Only weird little girls can see it.
The series like Santa but with a weird list.
No, that's just me. Are you weird enough to know me truly?
So yeah, Siri takes a peek out the window and it's a bad time for her.
Terrible time. She's in a machine, so being contained is not great for her. But also, because we're in a machine, I would imagine the electronic interference is messing with her. So she's just a little automatically uncomfortable in this setting anyway, but it's not terrible. However, looking out the window, looking at the curvature of this planet, seeing the ocean, and then she can't help herself. She's trying to get in tune with what's going on here so she can best figure out if there's something she can do to solve it or help her do something in some way. The news is worse than she thought in the fact that we're at like a cataclysmic ecological crisis, which I guess makes sense since the moon got cursploded, but it's worse than what even like little in conversation Sierra and the other scientists have mentioned to her, and that sets like a rock to her gut.
Oh, I think this is also when we were talking a little bit about what the tour guide was saying, and there was mention of meteor showers, which made Smog like, like what the fuck? Oh. Normal meteor showers.
Not that one.
Yeah.
Occasional meteor showers that are still experienced on Chrysalis are due to the fact that the moon has been fragmented. There's this belt that occasionally overlaps with the planet and creates these meteor showers. It's not like it's just shooting stars, though. These are some that do leave pretty substantial craters. That is very much aligned with why the general habitability for life has become so dire. The governance had access to a lot of technology that could reform and reshape characteristics of planets. And humanity is using that to the best that they can, but there's a lot that's been knocked out from underneath it.
I still want, at some point, to fix the moon. I think that should be a fun end goal target.
We'll fix the moon.
We'll get it together, even if Asiri has to pick up little pebbles piece by piece.
Well, if Final Fantasy things keep happening to this place, then there'll be another moon coming in, and we could just boot the old one out.
Oh my God. Thought of that. I don't think that would happen, but who knows what you all will do. That
much less poetic than what I had in mind.
The moon has been cracked apart for a couple millennia now, but it was specifically through the actions of humanity's resistance that the moon was brought down upon them. It just kind of finalized the deal.
If we could stop the sleep beast from pitching a fit, maybe there's something he could do.
Yes, I think I can make that work. I do want to go back to the world of the spirit, and one of the things I do want to do is go talk to the beast about this. So thank you for reading my mind.
Please go back to the worlds. I promise that there are changes that are happening as you all are absent.
But these issues do lead Asiri to speak with Tau.
Yes. And I was a little, on the fence of who to talk to about this, because I was like, on one hand, I could absolutely talk to Smog, because Smog, via Alexander, has, I'm sure, wealths of knowledge of ramifications of cause and effect. But it's also Smog and Alexander, so she's not terribly inclined to. But you know who's also in the process of making things right in a world? Tau. And maybe this isn't the best time to ask, because we're not speaking with Tau Prime, we're speaking with Sequence Charter Tau. But, who knows how much information goes back and forth between them. So Asiri just sits down and is like, hey, how do you decide how much influence to exert over a place? You're actively building one. How are you picking where these things go and should feel? Tau's answer was, well, I don't know everything Tau Prime feels right now, but it seems to be best to do whatever just feels right at the moment.
The act of creating their own world has been accomplished, but continually shaping it and deciding how a world gets constituted is still something that they're in an ongoing process of learning. I think that's why all of these other Taus are seated in these places.
Mm-hmm.
The big lesson they seem to have is I was able to come into this power because I met so many other people. You need to keep a dialogue with the people you're trying to help to best help them.
Yeah, and that's absolutely going to influence a series choices here moving forward. But I've come to realize that yet again, I've put myself in the position of a deity that does not make things. This is the second time I've written a character like this that does not create or have divine powers in the same sense as the Abrahamic God would. So I don't know why I keep doing this, because the Abyss specifically tells Tau in this scene, I don't make things. I just nudge, move, I influence things, but it's not my place to be this direct here. So that's why they're really apprehensive about going ahead and just doing something, because they want to help. They feel the pain of the water in the ocean here. They feel the life here that is just suffering, but they're like, is it right for me to step in here? And that's the quandary Asiri is struggling with.
I think if that conversation had been with Smog, it would be fairly different. Probably the same argument would have been made, but there's also this block that Sierra tried to help him with. I know what's supposed to happen, and if we stick to it, everything will coalesce, but wants everyone to be aware of the world around them as well.
For Smog, everything about the past and the future have some outward presence to him. It's the present that is the trickiest part.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I guess I'm curious, what would have Smog ultimately said if Asiri had come talk to him?
Especially now that the Dark Link is not mutual. Smog changed that to a Heart Link. I think it would be more about his trust in her, but also encouraging her to learn more beyond just what she's looking at right now. Learn more from the trip, learn more about the Zeppelin. Pony had an opportunity to keep engaging with different things. You don't need to focus on what's broken.
I like that. I also like that Smog and Pony have a moment where they're yucking it up, talking about the ship and talking about fashion. And Pony, who has talked previously to Terra about constructing some power armor for Horse, is like, hey, Smog, can you help me design this? And I think that's brilliant, because Smog has been doing nothing but sketching clothes this entire month or so in game.
Clothes is mostly this trip, because he's been playing around with, like, Magitech weird devices.
What is armor but hard clothes?
This isn't necessarily armor that he's making. Like, he was making, like, weird devices. I think I said he was looking at a fan. He's like, oh, if we had some magic, what could we do with that? He mostly has not been creating things for combat purposes. It's mostly this trip where he's like, I like fashion. I'd like to be presentable more so the next time we have to meet the public in a large way. Is like, I should make something for myself while we're on this trip. I literally, while we were playing, pulled up the main villain of all of the non-MMO numbered titles of Final Fantasy and just stole elements from all of them.
Right. Yes, those descriptions that you were listing off that were on your little sketchpad, you were going through all of the different Final Fantasy outfits. I'm like, this is some villain-ass attire.
Yeah. Curved, pointed epaulets, open jacket so you see the chest, glowing necklace and earring, asymmetrical coattails, one that is a different color, metal greaves and boots that have a psychoglass suspension with metal so that it can move around and glimmer. Villain-ass shit. For Pony, we talked about creating like a blanket. She wanted an apple on it. Smug was like, all right, I'll make these apples a little wobbly and pink so they can also look kind of like cow spots and go with your hat.
It's really cute.
Sounds so adorable. That'll probably be easy to figure out. Hopefully we don't need a bomb-ass designer on that. What will be fun is that armor, though, because I just showed off, like, I think something from Final Fantasy XIV as far as Magitech armor. The typical sort of black with gold etching. That hit with me finally. Oh, it's two-legged and high up like that because they're emulating chocobo riding because these people have ridden chocobo. So I was like, oh yeah, this is for chocobo riders. So we need to like move stuff around, but if we take out the innards, this might work for you. And Pony was like, I was thinking more Rococo than Gothic.
Pony knows what she likes.
That's true. But also, like, who taught Pony what Rococo style?
I don't know. Man, the Shrek universe, people know things.
That's true.
She probably stole an art book out of the Ringmaster's caravan. There are some other options for mechanical things in Final Fantasy that work with that. You've got this plasteel looking stuff from Final Fantasy 13, and hey, I finally beat Final Fantasy 16. There are ceramic, long lost ancient technology enemies that fit very well with that too.
I just can't wait for Power Armor Pony to just like crush somebody in half with their hooves.
Do you think she's going to have VATS?
Yes. She better. Or I want my money back.
Oh my god. Holy shit. That would be perfect. I don't remember if Pony has Year Second, but
I think she does, yeah.
that is like exactly like the best explanation.
That's true.
How that could work of taking multiple basic moves in succession. It's just like that.
We need to make Carolyn play a Fallout before she gets her playbook change.
Or maybe just watch a Fallout playthrough.
I have a sneaking suspicion that Carolyn has at least seen the Monster Factory for Fallout 4, which is, I think, close.
Yeah, probably.
I like how Carolyn said that Pony and Tara are going to be short queens having pal moments.
Yes.
It is very fitting that Pony's been getting a little bit of tutelage and guidance from Tara because, man, they definitely have some really similar attitudes about how they feel about a group and how they want to handle certain problems.
Yeah.
With their legs.
From there, Asiri wakes up napping Powder to have a quick conversation.
Okay, Asiri did not wake up Powder. Powder just woke up.
We asked about like what Powder was doing. I got it in my head that it would be very, very funny if Powder, who was probably the most excited about going on a trip, would start glued to the window looking out, but would very quickly fall asleep on the chair because it was just so comfortable.
Yeah, or that like they're like so excited that they spent all this energy getting ready for the trip, but the second that they sit down, they're just zonked.
Yeah.
She also has a very physically taxing job that doesn't seem like she takes any sort of break from. So once you get one chance to relax, it's all sleep.
That is a good point, too. And I guess maybe this gives a little bit of a hint as to how Powder struggled in history class.
I can't listen to a lecture at all.
Not listen to a lecture. An hour-long class? No. But Powder's napping. Yeah, Powder thought she was out for maybe a few minutes, but like the trip's already been like a couple of hours. You're already getting closer to landing.
Yeah, I would have said the sunset, but that's only because we moved into the dark zone. But yeah, they talk about the stars and the night and heart-to-heart things like family and their past and all that good character exposition stuff.
Powder has a group of children that she was raised with that she considers siblings, even if they're not genetically related.
That was a detail that I thought about, because kind of just rationally, it would have made sense for that to happen. Kind of like when kids were sent off, let's say like in London in World War II, to just get them out of like the city into a safer place.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is something that could have very likely happened with a whole bunch of the kids, so that they would be taken out of any area that would be possibly seen as a military interest.
How old was Powder when the war started, or were they born like during it?
Powder was born during the war.
Yeah, I figured she wasn't that old.
Right. Powder was born about halfway through the war, a little bit on the earlier side, but obviously was way too young for any of the humans to even consider putting them in as a soldier.
We also get to learn about Asiri's parents.
And I have doodled them, but I need to refine these sketches. Asiri's mom looks a lot like her, more shark-like body, but with... I don't know if anyone else knows what a larvacean is, but they are cool. So if you want to look up a really cool invertebrate friend, look up a larvacean. They're like a see-through tadpole sort of thing, but like that is her, I guess, hair equivalent. Asiri's dad is just like mostly octopus squid tentacle thing. And she talks about them for a little bit. She mentions she hasn't seen them in a couple decades, which is the very polite mermaid way of saying they're probably dead.
Yeah.
But she doesn't know, and, you know, people have turned up. It's just her cultural way of saying we haven't seen them in a long time. But they're still sung about, so they're still with us. And she talks about her sister a little bit. Life is confusing. It's very hard for Asiri to relate to a lot of the human structures because people talk to each other so much, and they're always together, whereas her people are very solitary unless there's something they have to do. In fact, she knows that it's kind of strange that her parents were typically together as much as they were. In this conversation, I got maybe more sad than I should have, because at one point, Powder's just like, you know, I know a lot of people, I can physically help them. I'm not the most mentally sharp, but, like, I can physically do things for them. She says, like, I'm not smart, and then the series just like, I think you are, like, maybe not in the same sense that other people are, but the traits that you're describing, being able to find things, being strong, being able to support others, those are very valuable things in at least a series culture. That makes a good hunter, so that means you're probably a good person. So you shouldn't be, like, down on yourself for that.
And I didn't necessarily mean for it to come across that Powder was down on herself because of that. Powder has generally come to a sense of acceptance of their situation. Powder is mostly at peace with herself.
I think maybe it was more the vulnerability.
Yeah.
That conversation had that got to me more than her, like, self-deprivating.
Yeah.
I love that this ends with the series saying that Powder can take her room for the night, and then not knowing that the sleeper cabin that is prepared for her is just full of water, just like opens the door and sploosh water.
You could go, okay, let me tell you exactly how my brain went. I was like, okay, Asteri's not going in that room. Absolutely not, because she's already uncomfortable in this situation. That's a tighter room, so she's not going in there. She didn't even look. So she was like, you know what? Here, Powder, you can have this. You're probably going to get more use of this than I will. What did Dan say? The room assignment, like, Powder was with Geyser? And I was like, that's probably not going to...
I initially had Powder with someone else. I'm retconning it that Powder would have been roomed with Geyser. So
I think Sarah's just like, let's nip that in the bud right now. You can have my room. Unbeknownst to her, that Smog had arranged to have comfort things put in for us. So Powder just walks into a room of water.
Yeah, Smog with the travel agent was explicitly like, hey, we need these accommodations for people who are not humans. We're not humans. You can't just treat us the same way. So the travel people are like, all right, we'll do the best that we can. They had a room that had a pool in it. Sorry.
That's part of why we landed with, we were talking about airplanes. Do we all get 2 first-class seats so that we can, like, seat Pony and Assyria? That doesn't quite make sense.
Yeah. Whether it was Powder stumbling in or realizing that, oh, sweet, there's a pool in here, I'm going to cannonball in, I'm going to leave that up to audience interpretation.
I'm going to choose to believe the latter, but I think it's more than likely the former.
Both are equally possible.
Por qué no los dos?
Stumbles in mid-fall, like, oh shit, a pool. Well, might as well make the best of this cannonball. Nighttime is now a given because we're on the dark side of the planet, so eventually people just start filtering back to their rooms. People are tired from travel. The cafe closed down, so ship's probably minimal services up to this point until we probably get closer to docking in Union Charter. You know, most people make the logical decision to go to sleep. Assyria chooses not to do that because she doesn't care. But also, it's dark time, so she feels better. But this presents an opportunity for Smog and Tao to go hang out in the world of the lost, and oh boy. It's always an adventure to see where you end up in the world of the lost.
Where you are when you enter the world of the lost has an impact on where you end up within the world of the lost. If you're in a completely different part of the world, what you see when you go into the world of the lost is geographically a different region. But this was through air travel. My thought is, wouldn't it be interesting if they arrived in this old 60s era passenger jetliner?
Complete with a stewardess.
And everyone's smoking.
Yes, I wanted lots of beige, and then people were smoking in there. The World of Lost tends to obscure a lot of the scenery that's too far away from your current location. Like in the World of Ages, it was brightness of the illuminated grasses there, and then in the World of Spirit, for example, it was a really dense jungle. In all of these locations, you can't quite see all the way out. You can get the sense that there's more the further into the Lost you go. And yes, I also really wanted to play with the idea of an airline stewardess, because I thought that would be great. I like things in the World of the Lost treating their surroundings as normal, even though functionally that's impossible.
Yep, I love Tao asking when the plane will land, and her just staring out and then asking if Tao has another question.
Yeah, if there's like anything else that they need from like the cart.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Soft reset.
Yeah.
We're probably never going to see the stewardess again, but it's like the campiest shit I've ever seen.
No, that's why I wanted to do it. It was only Smog and Tao. So, Alex, what were your initial reactions to seeing that you wound up there?
I mean, I was definitely looking to talk to the Master and or Teddy. So my first thought is, when things are not shit, they tend to be like in charge or like on their way somewhere. So it's like, they're definitely in the cockpit, right? And that was not the case.
Yeah. Teddy, they were left behind. Teddy's back at the park. What I wanted to do was include a bit of a reference in that the Master's arrival onto the plane was meant to parallel a pretty famous episode of The Twilight Zone, the one with William Shatner.
Hell yeah.
Where there's just some, in the effect, it's like a guy that's in a gorilla suit that's just like running on the airplane wing. But I wanted to do that with the Master instead.
Eventually, like, Smog orders a martini, and then the Master becomes the olive in the martini. But, like...
You all were still wondering, the Master's outside of the plane, how we need to talk to them. I think Smog was pondering the feasibility of, like, opening a window on the airplane to see if they could get the Master in or go outside.
Physics don't seem to work quite the same way in the World of the Lost, so...
There's a lot of things that don't quite work right in the World of the Lost. It's a very dreamlike place. One of the things I was thinking about is that the Master can substitute things that are in the World of the Lost because they're the Master of it. And that took the form of being Little Olive in Smog's Martini. which just turned into an eyeball.
I love how Smog is so upset about this too. They're like, you ruined my drink.
I do like how Smog was so happy. This is specifically Smog in the form of being in the world of the Lost, where Alexander is a smaller automaton that travels with him, and Smog behave, at least in talk, a lot more similar to how they used to before they became the avatar of Alexander. So Smog's just like, oh, finally, travel in style. All the 60s beige and cigarettes.
Right, that's where we get the title, How Travel Was Meant to Be.
Alexander, this is disgusting.
This is disgusting.
What is wrong with you? I don't know, Alexander. You picked this Moogle. You should have known what you were signing up for.
I do try to make it very apparent, especially with this version of Alexander. Not an omniscient god. This is a fraction of the power that was sent to keep Smog moving along. This is not every bit of Alexander. We've seen flashes more like that, especially recently.
Yeah, I would say the entirety of Alexander is absolutely beyond time. So it's quite difficult to bring all of that at once into a setting like this.
I also like Smog's goal. I hesitate to say ulterior motive, but I guess his goal here was to set up a game of fucking blitzball.
Yeah. When we land, you need to get Teddy or yourself to set up a nice water dome for us so we can play a game.
And then the master's like, I could just bring the plane down. We'll land over water, right?
No, I kind of want everyone to be around to experience that. Ty doesn't get a head start on the rules.
The master's just like, well, this is fun. Let's go rip through people's luggage. God, everything is so unhinged.
Not to overuse the term, but the world of the Lost is a feral place. It's a world that's not meant to be comprehended and to exist and be like interacting with a conscious mind. As a result, it's just completely twisted on its head.
I like the Ty doesn't really mess with it. They're like, oh, they're just having fun. It's fine.
The passengers themselves have at most a mild perturbament to the rummaging. It did sort of show that there is a lot of stuff that winds up in the world of the Lost. Going through the luggage, you can see all of these things that evoke memories of stuff that has since been lost. Smog, interacting with all these things, was able to feel and experience a little bit about the types of things that wound up there.
Hey, would y'all have done anything differently?
Maybe I could have done structuring of an arc of how this could go, because the notion of travel was mentioned before the interlude happened, but I don't regret not doing that, if that makes sense. The pacing was a bit slower this session, which does kind of contrast it with the one before that, which was the climax of the World of Song. So
it also wasn't boring to like brainstorm what are the solutions to these things at the table together.
Mm-hmm.
I do like role-playing things that are also peaceful and tranquil. We got a pretty good deal of that, where it's just more of an immersion into the setting.
Listen, a story is about highs and lows. You can't be at highs the entire time, or it's just too much. So it's nice to slow down and take a relaxing blimp ride.
This was sort of the equivalent of, in a more combat-focused game, a session where you don't have combat, because I think I didn't roll dice except making links, maybe? So I didn't interact with the moves that much. This is a very RP-heavy session.
Heck yeah. I think I'm good. I don't really have any regrets. I am tempted to see what happens if I did go talk to Smog instead of Chow, because I think that would have maybe given an opportunity for Asiri to change her mind about how Smog is now, but I think it's funnier if she stews a little bit longer.
My only thing is I would have liked to have tried to think of some way to interact with Asiri more, because I ended up having a scene with Pony and 2 scenes with Tao.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't intending to go to the World of Lost. It was that conversation with Pony that led me there, and then Zach was just like, yeah, Tao will go there as well.
I do like how all the other ones are like, I just want a good night's sleep. Going to the World of the Lost is never a good night's sleep. You
may be physically rested, but your mind is just all out of sorts the next day.
It's like having the most bizarre dreams. At worst, it's painful.
I did have Smog in character. No, it was actually Alexander, because this makes sense in a funny way for a time god. Be like, we have to double up our vacation. We have to exploit this.
Yes. We must min-max our pleasure.
Oh man, having Alexander on the brain makes you schedule everything. It's all about those timetables.
Hell yeah. Best person to have on a vacation.
God, our itinerary is going to be stacked.
We're going to visit every fucking museum they have available.
Me? Actually me.
Are you a time god?
I'm not allowed to answer that legally. Alright, let's get into the resolution phase, the segment of the show where we each get to say something about the game with no responses. What is your final say on this session, Daniel?
Come take a trip on my airship. You can find me in the captain's cabin. I'm a co-pilot, and I'm just sort of enjoying the experience of being able to steer the plane, but not completely autonomously. I do have a plug this week. The book Airborne by Kenneth Opel. Reading online, it apparently has won an award. Apparently it's pretty good. I did read it a long time ago, so I don't fully remember.
What about you, Alex?
I hope it's been made clear through how I've talked about smog, but smog is very wrong here. You should not be smoking in enclosed spaces, please, if you must smoke. You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Shining Crowbat. This week I'm recommending Psych Odyssey. This is a pretty long documentary series about the making of Psychonauts 2. There are episodes about Psychonauts 1 development, an interquel VR experience, and sort of a game jam that the company does as well. But it's a very rare look through corporate game dev and the tension that sort of brings when you're making art, but you also have to have an office job, and what getting taken into Xbox games and Microsoft looks like. A very interesting time for the company, and it really makes you remember that a lot of big games now, their timelines are on the order of 5 to 10 years. So keep that in mind when you're playing your giant games.
And for myself, I'm excited to see the new cultures of this other city, and I kind of want a series to bother the people in the city, so we'll see where that takes us next time. You can find me luring sailors to their doom on these sharp and deadly rocks. This has been Resolve, an Afterplay show. You can find us online at most social media sites at ResolveAP.
Except Instagram, which is at Resolve Afterplay.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. You can buy the game we're playing, Interstitial, Our Hearts Intertwined, from its creator, Riley Hopkins, at linksmithgames.com.
All links will be included in the episode description.
Thank you again for listening. We end our turn here, so now it's your turn. Tell us what's happening in your game.